So today we have a great academic here, a school friend, Mu'amr Mollagee, and he's going to talk to us about some deep-rooted extremism in Africa, and he's going to go through, why we have terrorism in Africa. So, hello.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Good.
I know.
Thanks for having me. I haven't actually been able to express a lot of my research on any platform, so
Yeah.
I'm excited to.
This is what I wanted. I wanted us to have a conversation, and I wanted us to, sometimes you said it earlier before we turned on the video about, there's so many people at our academic universities that don't actually get enough media attention and the ability to show what they're researching and
definitely
to the world. So I think hopefully this will educate a lot of people on these issues, man. So
sorry, can I just butt in?
Yeah, for sure.
It's important for us young people to be having these conversations and to be
you can look in those mics if you want to talk directly to the people.
To be talking about these issues. And it's important because a lot of the knowledge that we take as like sacred text or sacred discourse has been written by, the power dynamics of the past, by white men who had one sort of perspective on history and a lot of other history being ignored. And we sort of entering academia with, these sensitivities in mind and being aware of like, what are the things that are missing from this? And how can we direct the conversation and make people aware of this? And how can we then go back and redo everything that we think and overcome these problems? So, yeah, I definitely think it's important for more young people to be,
active,
talking about these issues.
Yeah. So maybe can you tell me about what kind of got you to the subject of extremism? Can you tell us about your...
Yeah, I think it follows like the history of like me growing as a person. So when I was in primary school to the middle of high school, I was Muslim. I grew up in a colored Muslim community. And yeah, we're in the same high school, so how, you don't want to come across as the most religious person. You want to come across as smart. And how smart is someone really if they're like, oh, I unconsciously believe in, God and like whatever. So I joined the philosophy team, started interrogating these things, like questions such as, what if I was brought up in a Christian or Jewish background? What, would I not then be, how can I just accept this? So yeah, and it takes you like on a path of trying to like discover yourself, because a lot of these things are like, you expect it to unconsciously just accept it. So Islam is something that if you speak to anyone that's Muslim, it's not just a religion, it's a way of life. And I think that I didn't really understand that then, but now I do. And so when you're trying to like ask these questions and navigate through life and your own sort of worldview, you tend to like neglect it. So I deviated quite far from my identity of being as a Muslim. I wanted to fit in. I wanted to, seem cool, didn't believe in God, didn't, smart, whatever. Because, those are the ideals that, like, fit in at the intellectual sort of high school. And then when I was in university, before university, I worked for government. But yeah, I don't think I don't think there's any interest in there. And I drifted through, social science. I was interested in politics because I work for government. So I wanted to know these dynamics, realize how, what a messed up situation South Africa is in. And then sort of you get to a point in academia where the transition from undergrad to postgrad, and you start thinking about like what it is you're actually interested in. Because something that's lacking from academia is people that come from certain backgrounds that are putting their perspective and talking about these issues where they are aware of these sensitivities. So instead of having like a white man talking about Islam, I'm a colored Muslim from South Africa. I can talk about these issues because I'm aware of the sensitivities of being a Muslim.
Yeah.
And then I sort of, when everything, I made this like pact with myself, like at the beginning of undergrad, I don't want to talk about Palestine and Israel because like it's too complicated, whatever. But then I got to a point where it was like, actually, I want to figure out what's going on. And then I started realizing there's a lot of aspects of Islam that isn't captured by knowledge. That the people that are actually talking about these issues aren't aware of these sensitivities. Something as simple as there's this myth in Islam that towards the ends of days there's this orange man that's going to come into power and the Antichrist is going to come down and the Muslim community is going to be fighting this evil. And a lot of people translate that evil as the West. The orange man is Donald Trump. That the end of days is near, and how that amplifies everything. Because if we're going to be dying soon, then this is an issue we need to deal with. Yeah. So that's like one aspect. It isn't properly captured. It's like called Islamic eschatology, the end of days, and the signs that would make you aware that the end of days is near. And then I was in a relationship with someone that was Jewish, and it made me realize how complex, these issues are and what's happening in the Middle East. And we really need to try and solve it. Like, people need to become aware of what these issues are and understand it in tangible terms. Because if you try and think about, like, what the causes of terrorism are and what people are saying, like, as a Muslim, some of them are it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. So we need more people to actually want to solve this and talk about it. People that are Muslim, that know about, how, and the thing is, it's scary because I remember being when I was younger and going to mosque and thinking about some of the things that they were saying and just like how angry it made me, how like upset it made me that there are people that are struggling, just for wanting to live and, being Muslim. And I sort of, not that I would, but I can understand why some people, in deteriorating social conditions where there's nothing left to live for, I can understand why people are like, there's nothing in this world to live for. And then then you start moving into the whole like extremism and indoctrination and radicalization process. But I think we can talk a bit more in depth about that later. Yeah. So I started doing research on the causes of terrorism in Palestine and Israel and trying to sort of assess what the current knowledge is on that and what are things that are missing and what needs to be talked about in practical ways so that we can actually solve it. Because people are quick to say like, oh, yeah, we're going to think of the smart thing or say the smart thing that, no one's never thought of. But it doesn't always translate into practical, solutions. How do we actually deal with this? No one's saying anything. And a lot of these things are like, it's stuck in discourse. No one wants to actually, start untangling this and being like, okay, cool, we'll mediate Palestine, Israel and try and solve this. No one. Like, it doesn't matter. You can talk about these issues, whatever, but like it needs to translate into practical solutions. Yeah. So then that's when I started my master's and trying to think about, what are some issues, when it comes to violent extremism that needs to be tackled. So then I started looking at, what policies in place to tackle violent extremism and terrorism. And then that led me to Cabo Delgado in Mozambique, something that's on the outskirts of our border, something that poses a threat of, extremism to sub-Saharan Africa, a place where violent extremism and the influence of ISIS and Al-Qaeda has never been able to infiltrate before. Yeah. Now we have it happening just outside. Is this something we should be afraid of? Why was it so easy for them to fall prey to an Islamist insurgency? Yeah. Like, should we be worried? So that's currently what I'm sort of, looking at and trying to untangle. And the thing is that this is ongoing. These are things that are happening now, and we need to start like thinking about it and trying to figure this out now before we end up in a situation where we have, a sect of Al-Shabaab forming in South Africa. Yeah. Yeah. And the thing is that all of these things are rooted in social grievances, political grievances, cultural grievances. Yes. And South Africa in some ways has it a lot worse. Yes. So we should be scared. We should really.
But how do you think terrorism? Why has terrorism become an issue today? Why do you think it's become so in the media? For the past 10 years, the idea of extremism is a lot more widespread.
It's a lot to it. And I was actually speaking to someone about this yesterday, and that it's funny because there are aspects of terrorism that existed before 10 years ago, like 1980s even, but what actually helped catalyze and foment like terrorism as a credible sort of conflict strategy to the West or to whatever power structures of governments, whatever, is, the media. Like, it's essentially using this Western social and political and cultural structure of media and using it against them. Like, the reason why we see terrorism as a bigger issue today is because we know about it and we can see what it can do and we're scared by it. And that's what media has done. But these things were ongoing before. I mean, I might diverge quite a bit, but the history and inception of terrorism is quite interesting. So terrorism in the sense like, okay, the political understanding of today is to create a spectacle of violence and instill a fear for political ends. So if you look at how sort of this, it's deeply rooted in the history of Islam, or from what I have read. So if you go back to when the Prophet, peace be upon him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, died, there was contestation over who would then continue, who is now going to be in charge of the Muslim, like world, of the Muslim society.
That's where
where the split first happens. So it was the Shiites, the more radical sort of sect, and then the Sunni, one that sort of adhered closely to what the Prophet, peace be upon him, followed. And the one was, I think, the Prophet's son-in-law, and the other one was Abu Bakr, who is the Prophet's like uncle, right-hand man. I should have probably but those are the two different sort of sects that formed. And the one sect, the Sunni Islam, preached a conservative form that was inclusive, diverse, and tolerant of other cultures and societies. And then you have this rapid expansion of the Muslim empire into one of the most progressive places and like societies that existed. The idea of zero, numbers, science, it's all rooted in that period of the Muslim empire, the Sunni Caliphate. So like zero entering our number system. These were all like massive inventions that was allowed to take place because of the sort of pragmatic and conservative version of Islam that was followed. But then the Shiism was like, they were always about like, the issues of the world exist because we diverging from pure Islam. So this was the inception, like they wanted to preach and follow a strict version, or orthodox, if you can say, version of Islam. But eventually they struggled to, maintain their strengths, and it got to a point where you have a scenario. There's a famous tale, it's called like I forgot it, but there's this, so the story 300, and how these small group of men knew that they were going to die. They stood up and they were killed. So essentially that's what happened. You have the last descendant of the Shia family, they're at this one mosque, and they know that they're going to be attacked. And instead of running away, he says, no, we're going to stand our ground. We're going to fight for what we believe in, and Allah will make sure that we get a place in heaven. Okay? And what happened is, some of them left, but, true followers, whatever, stayed, and they fought. They died, but they fought. And that is what immortalized them. He became the first martyr. So then the younger generation of Muslims were like, there's problems with, the Islam, like why, women not wearing burqas, why are we smoking? Like drinking was actually a big thing in Muslim culture. It doesn't say in the Quran that you can't drink. It says that you shouldn't do anything that's addictive. And Arabs were the heaviest drinkers. So it's more part of the culture to not drink than it actually says in the Quran. But so they saw all these issues and they weren't happy about it. And then they knew about this guy who died for what he believed in, and who was preaching that Islam was diverging from its pureness. And that's what was the issues. And then you have the Mughals and everything destroying the Muslim empire, and then you have like a bit of a medieval period where Constantinople, all of these other issues coming up, and then this version of Shiite Islam then being like, okay, that's our solution. That's what we need to go back to. And you have this, they call him the old man, who bought this impenetrable castle in Iran, what's now known as Iran. I can't remember what it was called. And he made it a haven for people that wanted to follow the stricter version of Islam to join, where they could practice it, gain followers and, maintain their strengths and start to then carry out the stricter version of Islam throughout the world. And what happens then is quite fascinating, because what he would do, like, it's so intense. So the idea of assassin comes from these first Shiite Muslims from the old man of the mountain period. He was the one that trained them. So assassin it comes from hashish eaters. So it's a drug that you would ingest before you would go and carry out your mission. So what he would do is he would sort of train these people into, Orthodox Islam, and then the idea of jihad or greater jihad coming up, where we need to then try and preserve Islam and, destroy anything that stands in its way. Whether it's a king, a queen, a person preaching conservative Islam, whatever, we need to destroy them. So I'm skipping a bit, but I'll go back. These people or men that were of age, they would then eat this hashish. And then they would be taken to the middle of the castle. This part of the castle was closed off to everyone. No one was allowed to go there until it was your time. And you would wake up in this dreamlike state where you would have all the riches that you wanted. You would be wearing gold, silk clothing. You would have all the women you wanted. You would have all the food you wanted. And then, for like a certain amount of time, and then you'd go in a delirium and then wake up. And the old man would say, that is what is waiting for you in the afterlife. That is what, or creating this desire that they want to go back to that. And then the old man would say, now you need to carry out your mission so that you can die in the cause of Islam and get something that's even greater than that. And that's where you see this interpretation of, the 72 black-eyed ones or the 72 virgins, But, yeah, I mean, whether or not that's like a powerful incentive, I mean, we can debate. But that's where these ideas sort of came from, is that, like, these men were still with the motivation, like, let's go carry out our mission so we then can attain this reward. Yeah. So assassins, I mean, sure, the game's portrayed in a certain way, but the idea is you would then eat hashish and then carry out these political sort of assassinations or whatever, killings. And the idea was that you carry out your mission, you kill your target, and then you leave yourself to die. Because now you're ready to accept your reward. You did your duty, now you die. And in every situation, it was expected of you to die. Whether it's like eating a poison so you killed, or you fighting until they kill you, because that was your goal, that was your mission. And they became so revered and respected and feared throughout the world that some empires would call on the old man of the mountain to help them out with political assassinations. And it's a big dark area. We don't know how heavily involved they were in certain uprooting of certain dynasties or whatever, but they played a very big role in that. And the people would come to the castle and he would be like, jump down. And they would jump down and die. Because he was seen as like the incarnate of God in a way, that if they do what he says, it's in defense of Islam, so they can then get their reward. Sure. So this was the inception of, and they would use like daggers and stuff to, do their killings. So this was like Shiite Islam at its just after its genesis. Like this is where, this is a large part of, although it's not not a lot of people sort of are aware of it, but this is deeply rooted in, Shiite Islam. And then in the 1980s, when Ayatollah Khomeini came into power in Iran, he rebirthed this idea of assassinations. So instead of using a dagger, you now have modern warfare and bombs. So now you could achieve the goal of carrying out an act in defense of religion, but also you would die in the process so you could accept your reward. So now you have people going around carrying out these missions and stuff, and that's the shift that happened. So it's the same. He rebirthed this idea, but using modern conventional warfare, and even the idea of using humans. So in the Iraq-Iran war, he used hundreds of thousands of children, armed with just stones, riding against the army that had guns. And he won. And he won. It's insane. But they were indoctrinated to the idea that they are fighting in defense of Islam, even though it is against other Muslims, because they're the pure version of Islam and the other ones are deviant. And he won. And it spirals a bit out of control, and then you have other organizations realizing how important this thing is. Because all you need is one person that's willing, like $10 worth of something from Radio Shack, and you have a human bomb capable of causing and instilling fear in the greatest of nations. You know?
Yeah.
And in areas where social conditions are worsening, you have a lot more people that are motivated to do this. And what made it worse is Ayatollah Khomeini would give your family although it says $25,000, but they got a lot less. If you had a son or daughter, well, mostly son, daughter came a bit later in terms of like the genesis of this, who would then be offering themselves because it's also a way for them to, you know, for their family to get money and to survive, you know, these deteriorating social conditions. And then you have like this martyr sort of like this idea and this like idealization of becoming a martyr. Like in schools, they would go and preach at schools, and these young children would jump at the opportunity to become a martyr.
I wanted to ask you,
like, it's quite in.
Can you explain jihad? Because a lot of people, like, you know, the Americans and everything talk about jihad, and it's obviously always a negative connotation to jihad. But what does jihad mean? What can you explain?
In practical terms, so that we understand like where, you know, what underpins a lot of these, you know, extremists is you have two kinds of jihad, lesser jihad and greater jihad. And the one that invokes, you know, defense of religion is more the greater jihad. And this is what all Muslims believe in, is that we believe that, you know, we need to try and protect Islam from anyone that's out there to destroy us. But in subtle terms, it would be like, you know, saying that people can't make fun of the Prophet, peace be upon him, or like, you know what I mean? So it's like, it's still conservative, you know, it can still be inclusive and like understanding of and acceptance of other cultures. But then you have the orthodox version, and this is where things get a bit messy, is that that version of like greater jihad has always been accepted. But then you get to a point where they're like, no, greater jihad is, you know, uprooting the evil of Western ideals and cultural norms from society and making sure that there's a spread of, you know, what Islam is about and the spread of like Islamic influence.
Yeah.
And that's where this sort of comes into play, is that defense of religion is then interpreted as being something that's proactive and not just like something where you indirect. So in some instances, like if you look at Palestine, Israel, you know, jihad in that situation isn't, and that's why Hamas is a bit different from like Hezbollah, Hezbollah is quite similar to Al-Qaeda and ISIS, is that they're regionally based. They're primarily concerned with Israel, and that's what jihad is to them. Protection of Islam and allowing the Palestinian people to continue to live. Whereas in a more global sense, jihad is interpreted as proactively going out there and making sure that the West, like, or just like wanting to gain, like proactively protecting in the sense that, like, you know, the West has its, you know, hands in, you know, oil, whatever, and we want to get them out of, so we're going to go and attack them and create fear and say that the only way we're going to stop is that they get out and then build from there and in a way sort of increase the influence of Muslim society to point us. Because the idea is that the greatest battle that's written about in the Quran is a time when the Muslim society will be faced with this impossible task of trying to defend itself. So, and the closer we get to all these, like I was saying earlier about the eschatology aspect, the closer we get to a lot of these sort of symbols being recognized, the more people are like, shit, this is actually happening. It is time. This is the battle that's being spoken about. Now it's time to pick up arms and defend. So it's the same aspect that's interpreted differently by Sunni Muslims, by Shiite Muslims, and it's the idea of what protection of Islam actually entails. And that's where you get the extremist radicalization process of jihad, that is quite common in a lot of these states and societies today, like Iran, Iraq. So that's,
So can you kind of like link about how the extremism moved to Africa, or when was its inception? Because most of us, the Boko Harams, the terrorism that's happening in
Al-Shabaabs.
they're in the media, but pretty much Boko Haram, the only thing I knew was like, okay, they kidnapped some girls. Like, I can't remember.
The Chibok girls. They kidnapped some girls, and it was a big media thing about it.
So could you kind of like just give us a little bit of a look at African...
Islam... I'm not very clued up on how Islam became so widespread in Africa. But it is. We can see today that Islam is quite predominant in Africa.
Yeah.
And, you have that area that's close to the Middle East. It's called like the MENA region, so Middle East and North Africa. You have Egypt, Tunisia, Algeria. All of those places are predominantly Muslim.
Yeah.
And obviously, like, you have people migrating in Africa, and it's like spread, across Africa. So the principles of Islam and the teaching of Islam is present in quite a lot of places in Africa. And what sort of happened was the fall of the caliphate in like the Middle East, then there was a rush to spread influence into vulnerable states of Africa. After independence, Africa was quite vulnerable.
Yeah.
And that's where some of them were able to spread their influence. But, then you have the same issues that happen in like Palestine or in Lebanon or in, Syria, Iraq, Iran, is that there were quite a lot of conservative Muslims that wanted to, quietly follow within the structures of power that be, Islam, live in a diverse environment and world. We know that African people are very communal, and it was normal. But then in the face of deteriorating conditions, Islam and religion can be quite a motivating force. And that's where you have, even if you look at how Hitler came to power, it's like in the face of continuing to deteriorate conditions, people are more willing to go to something that's way, like that's to the far right. So center would be status quo, something you're comfortable with. But if the social conditions are continuing to get worse, if people are continuing to be poor and dying and there's no food and there's nothing to live for, people are just like, there's nothing for them. And with like such bad, like poverty and stuff, people are more willing to vote for something that radically says, we will do whatever we can to solve the situation and make sure that we have food, and make sure that we have houses, and make sure that we have running water. And that's where radical Islam comes. And they also preach that the reason we're in this issue is not just because of, colonialism, whatever, it's also because we deviated from the pure version of Islam.
Yeah. So
it becomes such a strong mobilizing force. And, this didn't happen all over Nigeria. This happened, Boko Haram, they originated from the northeast regions. Yeah. And why that's symbolic and important is because Nigerian politicians, governments sort of tended to neglect the outskirts of the country. So poverty, inequality was a lot worse in these, distant locations. And that sort of became, and also like government apparatus, like security and everything wasn't as strong, their presence wasn't as strong there as the rest. Yeah. So you have these things building up. The social grievances are there. People are poor, people are dying, people don't have money, people don't have houses, people are suffering. And eventually it takes a form. And even then, like what we see as Boko Haram is a break off of a group. So you have a group, quite conservative, or let's just say like a normal like Muslim group, let's say Sunni Islam or something. And then you have people like, no, actually, like we think that they're not going to solve our problems. And you have a break off of that. Yeah. Like slightly more radical. And then from that group, you have another break off and another break off and another break off. And we just get to see the worst of the worst, the most radicalized, the most intense, because they commit the violence that we see today. Yes. So it's not to say that, this is such an unusual thing. Like the seeds are there. And we're starting to see that now across Africa. The seeds of all these things are there. The social grievances are there. So now if you talk about what's happening in Mozambique, it's quite interesting because the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda, whatever else, hasn't been able to infiltrate sub-Saharan Africa. So now it poses a unique problem. Like, how are they able to do this? Yeah. Like, is this something that we should be worried about? And if you look at Cabo Delgado, there's a lot of similarities between Cabo Delgado and Nigeria. Cabo Delgado is the northeastern region, the most isolated from the rest of Mozambique. It also has a significantly larger Muslim population. It also neglected by the government. There's not a lot of strong security presence there. And then a catalyzing fact then became that there's, like in the northern regions of Mozambique, there's a lot of minerals and gas. So there was a lot of extraction taking place, a lot of foreign companies and industries setting up shop. And then, you know, this was part of a catalyzing like fact or element in that, like, we don't have basic services. We're completely neglected. We are struggling to survive. The government is making money off the land that we live on. We are being displaced so that these people can come in. We have to live in like makeshift houses. Like, no.
But wait, is Mozambique a communist state? Because I thought it was a communist state, and I don't know why, but what is the economic situation in there? Because I know that didn't they nationalize a lot of?
Yeah, I mean, but you see the same nationalization happening, you know, in South Africa, in Tanzania. It's not unusual from a transition from like colonial powers to colonial rule. But there was Mozambique officially gained its independence in like 1970, 1975.
Okay.
Then you have Frelimo and Renamo fighting. And there's a lot of detail and a lot of important history that's there that are worth like looking into and getting into to properly understand the situation. But the reality is that the government played a huge role in creating these social grievances in people. And it's worse off in the Cabo Delgado region because it's the most isolated, the most neglected, you know. So sure, I mean, the nationalization is always an important thing. And yeah, it is a catalyzing factor because what happened just before the 2017 insurgency was that, you know, Total, Exxon, all of these foreign extractive industries are entering the region. People are being displaced, you know. There's money that the government's getting, like huge billions of dollars, but they're not seeing any of it. So even just knowing that facts, it doesn't matter what economy or whatever. These people are neglected. Their needs aren't being met. They are suffering, you know. And Cabo Delgado is also the one. It's a region, a district of Mozambique where there's quite a large Muslim population. And Cabo Delgado is also very strategically located because there's a lot of illegal sort of operations that take place there. It's on the border of Tanzania. You have like like drugs from Afghanistan coming through there into South Africa. You have illegal mining taking place. You have illegal extraction taking place. You have human trafficking. It's a focal point because it's an entry point into sub-Saharan Africa from Tanzania. So it was already a hub of illegal things taking place because the government didn't care, like it neglected Cabo Delgado. So it also creates like a more problematic situation because now when the insurgents, they're trying to take over these sort of activities to fund themselves.
Is there names of these insurgents? Because I just hear them called insurgents.
So there's a big debate on, it's a very big debate at the moment as to who these insurgents are. So what happened was similar like we were saying about like, you know, it's a more radical part or younger population that the Muslim sort of society, they're Sufi society, so it's something that's already seen as like obscure Islam.
What is Sufi?
Sufi is a more mystical version of Islam. It's I think it branches off of Sunni Islam, but it's more mystical. It's more like ethereal, if you say it like you know, like if you have the idea of like someone looking at crystals to tell the future, it's more like a mystical version of Islam. So when Mozambique gained its independence around 1975, there was the more elite sort of Muslims were able to establish the Council of Muslims. And then the Congress of Muslims was the more like working class Muslim organization that sort of came later, and they were able to create these funds and scholarships for students, for Muslim people, for young Muslim people. And they went overseas and they were trained, they got education from like Egypt, from Sudan even, from Afghanistan. And they came back and they were like, the version of Islam that we're practicing is, it's quite different. And also they're like, there was the expectation mismatch because you go and you get trained and you become educated, you come back, you don't even have a place to live. There's no basic services. So you have a youth bulge forming where the majority of people in Mozambique are young. They're also the most prone to carrying out political violence. And there's an expectation mismatch where what they can see, the government getting money from these extractive industries and stuff, and what that not being translated into opportunities for them, they become upset. So initially the insurgents are these younger people that are upset at the situation, and they start excluding themselves from traditional Muslim society. So instead of going to mosques and stuff, they would form their own mosques, they would form their own madrasas, they would have their own sort of a counter society taking place where they're like, we don't care, we're gonna follow what we believe in. But then it starts to get a bit complicated because the Council of Muslims are then like, but you guys aren't, you preaching a different form of Islam, you shouldn't. And then conflict eventually builds up, and then a lot of the, instead of them being excluded from society, they have to try and live in society because they're forced to. And that's when tension gets created. So what happened just before the 27 insurgency was a bunch of members of this group, let's call them Al-Shabaab, because that Al-Shabaab means it's like student, or Taliban means student. Al-Shabaab is a version of that where it's something that's significantly different. We are reinterpreting Islam to what it should be in a more pragmatic way. So they call themselves Al-Shabaab, but there is also Al-Shabaab in Somalia, and there's no actual links between them. And then they attacked, there were 4 sort of security structures like prisons where they released their comrades, and that's when things started to get worse. And when this happened, the Islamic State has always tried to get into Southern Africa, and they were like, now we have our chance. So we see the introduction of the Islamic State happening during this time. And that has severe implications. Firstly, they're starting to carry out... Sorry?
Who is the Islamic State?
The Islamic State is the same... So you have Al-Qaeda and you have ISIS or ISIL or Daesh or whatever you want to call it. And they have... After the breakdown of the caliphate in the Middle East, these were the groups of Islamists that tried to spread their influence into Africa and tried to extend the influence of the Muslim empire. So Boko Haram, that was first influenced by ISIS, then Al-Qaeda, then there was their own break-off. So they're quick to jump on these situations where there's Islamism is heavily ingrained in it because now they can spread the influence. But the kind of influence is also another debate, so which we can get to in a bit. So they started carrying these banners, the Islamic State, and there's now this huge fear. The Islamic State in sub-Saharan Africa, shit, what's going to happen? And why that is so symbolic is now you have the influx of foreign fighters that are coming to join the cause. You have people coming from Tanzania. You have people coming from all across Africa who are like, let's go. Let's join our brothers. This is our time. We're going to, implement a Muslim caliphate, which is what they now want. They want to implement a theocracy, but based on Islam, but a radical version of Islam, the Orthodox version, the Shiite version. So it becomes a lot more severe, and there's also a lot of, illicit activities that they can now take over to fund themselves. So it's such a big problem, and now it's transformed from something that was traditionally just a reaction from the younger, more educated Muslim people who are upset at the situation and the kind of Islam that was being practiced there, into one that is now extremely radical because there's an influx of foreign fighters that is a bit different from that. And there's no single unitary sort of banner that all these people are fighting around. You have isolated, armed groups that are sort of mobilize under the banner of like the formation of an Islamic State. They all fight for the same thing, but they're allowed to act independently. So you need to think of, and I think this is where like media and people that are talking about the situation gets it a bit wrong, is that like they say, so the insurgents of Cabo Delgado are now considered a foreign terrorist organization, which has like its own implications, because if the US recognizes a foreign terrorist organization, there's certain things that now need to be put in place. But this isn't a case of ISIS coming from the Middle East and setting up shop. It's more subtle. It's the exchange of influence, the exchange of resources, the banner of ISIS, so that you have the influx of foreign fighters. They don't come from, like ISIS headquarters or anything. It's more of like, think of it, they call it now, there's this term that they use, franchising the Islamic State.
Like satellites.
You get the banner of McDonald's. Yeah. We'll show you how to run things, but you're on your own. But you have similar goals in mind. But it's a bit more complicated because, sure, ISIS is quick to jump on the fact that these are radical Islamists that, they now have an entry point into sub-Saharan Africa. But these people, these Orthodox Muslims, they're Quranists. And that's important because the kind of Islam that they want to practice is very different from the kind of Islam that ISIS and ISIS members want to implement. So if you think of like what we know about Islam, so even if you don't know much about it, you know that Muslims, they pray 5 times a day. They go into mosque, they take off their shoes, and the way that men pray and women pray is a bit different, and they're isolated. These people, their mosque, you're allowed to wear shoes. You allowed to pray with women. So there's a bit of, and most importantly, they don't speak Arabic. How can the influence of ISIS be like said to be so severe in Mozambique when they can't even communicate properly? So sure, you can think of it more as like a franchise where there's exchange of influence and common goals, but at the end of the day, we might see another conflict between like ISIS and these insurgents. But you could see it as something where this thing initially ignited because of social grievances on the ground, but it's transformed into something where those people make up a small percentage of the actual insurgents now. So it might not even, so it's a very complicated situation,
So when it comes to Sharia law, they don't believe in Sharia law.
No, they do. I mean, Sharia law is just, like I was saying, like a theocracy, like the implementation of a rule of law that follows strict Islam. It's more about there's certain aspects. So when you say Quranists, you're saying people that follow the book to the T. Like there's no other interpretation. Like whatever the book says, that is what we do. The book says 2 times a day you make salah, that's what we're going to do. The other stuff comes from like a combination of hadiths and other stuff that's not necessarily located within the Quran. So even Shia Islam believe in praying 5 times a day. They believe in, men and women being separated when you pray. They believe in taking off your shoes when you go to mosque. But that's the way you start to become aware of, other documents, let's say, or forms of knowledge about how Islam should be practiced that aren't necessarily located in the book. And these people are Quranists. So there's a bit of a... But
so
again,
where does Sharia fit in?
Sharia is just so what ISIS, what it stands for and what Al-Qaeda wants to do, they want to establish an Islamic caliphate. So they want to establish a Muslim society, a Muslim empire. So whether it's based or starts in the Middle East, this is an empire that would extend across the world. So that's why they're trying to gain and spread their influence in Africa, because if they set up shop there, I mean, think of like Cold War. You have like America and USSR trying to get influence. So it works in a similar way. So if you have a string of states that that all want to pursue, the Islamic State, which is what ISIS stands for, the establishment of Islamic State, then it's going to be much easier instead of just having one.
But do they believe that it's already been established? Or
no, it's in the process of
it's in the process. Yeah. Okay.
It's sort of an ideal that you need to work towards.
Okay.
So ISIS is currently like they've kind of failed in the Middle East, so now they're entering Africa to try and like spread their influence.
Okay, so when it comes to Mozambique, do you have any projections, or do do you think? Where do you think it's gonna go in the next few years? Do you think it's obviously gonna deteriorate?
So why the situation has been a bit complicated is because when all of this violence started taking place, it was also the intersection of, when COVID happened. So 2017, the violence started, and what the government did was they sort of isolated, or in a way barricaded the northern region of Cabo Delgado, but it's also Mocambique de Praia, Masomia, Palma. I'm sure there's been a few headlines about the Palma attacks. The whole northern region is sort of cordoned off, and no one's allowed to enter there because they're trying to control the situation. So people haven't been actually to enter the ground and do research, because that's what initially happened, and then there was COVID. So, but now those restrictions are kind of being lifted. But it's also, I think it's important to point out, is that the Mozambican government was never actually properly prepared to fight off these insurgents. They always needed help. And what they did, which contributed to the issue, was that they hired military contractors. And we know how they can fuck situations up. So they first hired the Wagner Group from Russia. You know how those guys
Just give me some history.
No, it's just the fact that in trying to stop these insurgents, you're creating more insurgents, because you're creating a very bad situation in which human rights of every person is being violated. In defense, in trying to stop this thing. So you have normal Muslims that are being questioned about Muslims. You have people being thrown in jail because, they didn't go to mosque. It was insane things. So it's a very problematic situation. And when you have military contractors, they don't care. They don't care. They have certain goals. They need to stop the insurgents. They'll do whatever violent strategies they need to enforce. And then you have Dyke Advisory Group from South Africa, South African military contractor entering. So what we are completely aware of is that the Mozambican government was never properly equipped to deal with the situation. And they've, in a way, made the situation a lot worse. So what do we do? Firstly, we need to get an understanding of what the actual situation is. Because a lot of it has just been projections and theories, but there hasn't been a lot of on-the-ground research being taken place. And now that's slowly starting to enter the conversations. And a big theme that's coming out there is that we need to target these youths. We need to address their grievances. Because, like I was talking to you earlier about, why youth bulges are so important is because the people that go out and commit political violence aren't, younger than 10 years old.
But just explain a youth bulge.
So youth bulge is a situation or a society in which the youth, which let's say between 15 and 35, make up the majority of the population. And it is something that is considered a normal or slightly large, youth bulge, is where that age group accounts for 20% of the population. Do you know what the percentage of the youth or this youth bulge is in... Let's just look at Nigeria, Boko Haram. Do you have any idea what the percentage of those young people are?
I would say 30%, 40%.
45%.
No, wow.
Yeah. In Mozambique, it's 47. So they have the seeds for this. They always had the seeds of this. Because these are the people that will go out and commit violence. It's the people aged between 15 and 35. It's not 60-year-olds. It's not 10-year-olds. These are the people. So these are the people that you need to talk to and you need to work with.
Yeah.
Because they're the people committing the violence. And that's something I think is important for us to sort of understand, is that people come with all these complex solutions, policy and all of that. Just go talk to the people. And these are the people you should be talking to, because they're the ones that are going to carry out these acts of violence.
Do you know of any of I know this may sound like a simpleton question, but where has extremism being quelled, completely? That has been infected by it.
Sure.
No, or let me ask, is there a model where you can see where it's this has worked when it comes to these issues?
The problem of extremists occur in a situation where there's a deterioration of social structures. That's where people are willing to deviate from the center and vote for something, or be accepting of something that's a bit more radical. Because only radical can change the situation that has been unable to be changed. That's what happened, with Hitler being voted in Germany. So these things tend to come up where there's already a broken down of institutions and social structures.
Yeah.
And these are it's a multi-pronged approach that needs to then be taken, because it's not just trying to, stop them. It's also about, repairing the social, economic, political, cultural rights. Like, people need basic services. People need a government that's accountable and will do what they need. People need opportunities to work. So, it's so difficult to pinpoint, a situation in which extremists haven't been able to take charge, but it's usually because there hasn't been a breakdown of these structures and institutions. Because the only reason we become aware of these things is because, conservatives are unable to say that, we are going to move on from this. We are going to be okay. That's where radicals are sort of overshadow those conservatives. And that's then where extremists are able to take charge and where they gain influence and power. That's not to say that these extremists don't exist, even in South Africa, even in places like where you would think that, it's, everything's okay. We just don't know about it yet, So
it seems like you could maybe link extremism to almost inequality in South Africa, in that, inequality, you see a lot of countries that are equal in being very poor, but don't have the level of violence that we have.
And that's the thing. That's why we should be scared, because we already have the pre-existing conditions that's necessary for this to take shape.
Extreme inequality.
The thing is that South Africa is a bit more diverse than the rest of these other places in Africa, because these insurgencies and extremists come out of a place that's predominantly Muslim and more neglected. The Muslim population of South Africa is a bit more conservative and it's a bit less so. But the thing is that all what we consider extremists and radicalists is just people that are mobilized under a certain version of religion or Islam. But there are people that are extremists, that are radical, that want to change the status quo, that are existing in South Africa. It just takes a different shape. Because the majority of people aren't, rallied underneath the banner of Islam. There's something else.
Yes.
But it can also deteriorate. I mean, religion just changes the dynamics of everything, because our understanding of conflict, and I think this is a big thing. It's a big thing. And why the West just misses the mark completely is that it's material. I fight you. I want to kill you so I can get your land or whatever, your resources. Religion said, doesn't matter if you die, because you'll get rewarded in the afterlife. So it transcends conflict into something that intensifies and amplifies these situations and the type of conflict that is then pursued.
Yes.
But in South Africa, you don't actually have that aspect of religion being a mobilizing factor where people don't mind if they die. They're not worried about dying for the cause. There's none of that.
Yes.
But if that even trickles down into some way, like during apartheid years, the violence is going to get pretty bad, because we have the pre-existing social conditions for places like Nigeria and Mozambique. They have the same pre-existing conditions. The only difference is that they're a bit more neglected by the government. There's a lot more inequality. There's a lot more extraction taking place. Or, there is extraction here, but people are being displaced over this extraction. And it's been predominantly Muslim. And with the spread of global jihad and global Islamism, radical actors like ISIS and Al-Qaeda can easily infiltrate that and transform something that would, in any case, be a bit conservative into something that's super radical, because only then you can solve the problem. Because if you stay conservative, the status quo isn't going to change.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, supposedly there was a lot of talk about how cell phones, social media have affected the recruiting phase of ISIS.
Yeah.
So that's very interesting to think about, because it looks like you have a whole load of people doing extremism, and then other people seeing the extremism and saying, I identify with that.
Yeah.
And then receiving the material or going to war-torn countries, as you said, They're very good at recruiting these people, even from European countries.
Yeah, I mean, it works both ways though, because you have social media. Like it's a two-way street. It's like social media is able to show the world how bad the terrorism or these incidents of violence actually is.
Yeah.
People become more fearful over like shit. Like this is a scary thing. We need to stop it, and that then incentivizes people. Like now we can get them. Best military in the world, US, whatever. Like they spend like an insane amount on their army and military, whatever.
Yeah.
We now have something that we can fight them with. All it takes is one person and $10 worth of stuff from like Radio Shack, and we have something that can cripple them. Would you not want to do that if you were in a living somewhere and you being told that they are the cause of why you're in the situation, why you don't have food, why your son is dying, why your daughter is dying, why you can't why you don't have running water? Would you not do something about that?
But how can the West intervene in those areas in a progressive way?
I mean, where has the West intervened?
So you where's the level and what should you do?
I mean, it's a question of like a lot of those, like the US and the Western states or whatever, they only intervene when it benefits them. Yeah. Or to extend their influence, and they're never gonna want to solve an issue that actually they get to sell guns to the Islamists. You know, it's a good cash cow for them. You know, like why? I mean, they failed to recognize the Rwandan genocide as a genocide because if they did, they would then need to intervene. They did it too late. I mean, and then you have 100 days of like 800,000 people dying. Like, it's always
100 days.
Yeah, it's 100 days. I mean, I think it's 80 days and 100,000 people. I think that's the correct statistic. So in the space of 80 days, 100,000 people were killed, and I think that's statistically, that's one of the most violent periods or instances of violence in the history of the world. Like it's so it's like it's not about how the West can intervene. It's like how can we solve these issues? You know, because the West inadvertently created these structures that allow these things to take place anyway. I mean, the idea of a state, all of these things. I mean, us versus them. It's just they're doing the same thing. I mean, you call it terrorism, they call it military, except they use it with, expensive planes and expensive military suits. And then the other side does it with a person driving a truck with explosives. Yeah. You know, like they're both trying to, it's based on the same fundamentals of, self-preservation and state preservation. So
you're anti-war completely, do you think?
I wouldn't
I'm anti-war. Like, I don't believe in war itself. Like,
it's easy to say that, but the idea of the state and the world is inherently violence. The imposition of a state is violent. Yeah. I mean, we live in a state in South Africa, in Africa, because of colonialism. Yes. That process is inherently violent. It's the idea of patriotism, like us going to fight or becoming incentivized under the idea of protection to go and fight, across the world, someone that you don't know that actually doesn't affect you. And we're okay with that. But then someone else choosing to use a bomb to do the same thing, we're trying to tackle something when it's based on a model that's always been existent, always been there. Yeah. How are we okay with, an 18-year-old US soldier going to kill someone in the Middle East or something, and that's okay. That's okay. But someone else doing the same thing, but with a bomb, this is an issue.
But how do we stop both is what I'm saying, though. Like, I know you're about that.
But it's difficult because a lot of people want to try and solve this problem, but the problem is very complex. So there's different aspects of it. So you have this, if you're talking about peace, what is peace? Peace is what? You can say the absence of violence. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
In a basic term, absence of violence.
Yeah.
But that's only one aspect of peace.
Yeah.
So that's what you would call negative peace, would be the immediate. So if you're looking at the Rwandan genocide, it's people stopping the killing immediately.
Yeah.
But the conditions that gave rise to that violence are still existing.
Yes.
So then you have this idea of positive peace. Positive peace would be improving those structures, like making sure that those conditions that gave rise to it are also taken care of. And in South Africa, what do we have? We don't have positive peace.
We have negative peace.
I mean, the minimum wage is non-existent. Basic services. I mean, how can we say that people carrying out violence is wrong when the government has more than enough money to deal with these issues? They're just not doing it. But sure, if people aren't killing people now, that's fine. We have peace. But that isn't peace. That's one aspect of peace.
Yeah.
And so the same thing needs to happen. Like, you have to have this multifaceted approach where not only do you deal with the situation at the moment, but also try and work on the long-term goals.
Yeah.
So it's quite complicated. And I think that everything is a case-by-case scenario. I mean, it's easy to lump all these things together and say that, Islam is a problem. Like, just so you know, like, in my previous relationship, I was with a Jewish girl whose grandparents were from Israel. And they didn't know anything else about me other than I come from a Muslim family, because I wasn't even like I wouldn't consider myself like a proper Muslim when I was with her, because I wasn't like going to mosque or anything.
Yeah.
They still refused to meet me. And they said like, what if I'm a terrorist? How insane is that?
What?
How insane
That's
is that?
outrageous.
I'm not even joking. Like, that, I mean, that also is part of my journey of like, people just don't understand. Like, just because I'm Muslim doesn't mean like I'm, like one neuron away from like going out and blowing something up in the name of like Islam.
Yeah.
Like it's, people just don't understand, but it's because they don't care. They're not worried about dealing with the short-term and long-term things.
Some people would say that like, when they look at Muslim people, they see that, a lot of Muslim people follow their beliefs to the T.
Yeah.
Especially what I noticed when I was growing up, I noticed my friends that were strictly Muslim didn't drink alcohol at all, never ate pork, never indulged in
But this is the interesting thing, is because Islam, or if you think of like Islam or a Muslim society or a place that has, like, Islam is very linked to community and it's very linked to a way of living.
Yes.
So Islam is not just a religion, but it cuts cross-cultural, social, it has more intersections when it comes to how people live together, that, the only difference between, us living in South Africa and, more radical Islams is that they're just facing increasing levels of poverty. And they have people that are saying that, like, we need to preserve Islam because it's being attacked by the West, and then the conservatives being overshadowed. But the same, like, it's, Islam is just seen as an issue because there's more elements part of like Muslim culture and society that makes it so ingrained.
Yeah.
And Islam, not just considered a religion, it's a way of life.
Yes.
It's very different to, like, if you're Christian, I mean, you're not going to the church every day. You're not saying that you're Christian all the time. You walk at the house, Bismillah. It's a way of living. It's like, may God protect me. Assalamu alaikum. May peace be upon you. You're doing it all the time. If you see another Muslim person, there's something, that interaction is just a bit more cognizant of this history of similar shared experiences than, and I mean, it can be a good thing and it can be a bad thing, and in the face of like intense suffering, people that are getting to the point where they don't care about living anymore, surely it's going to create an issue.
Yeah. But I do think overall it's a very good thing, because the thing is, if you have the sense of community, I think that you're able to rely on each other in a much better way than a lot of other isolated communities.
But I think an important thing, like one of the last things I'll say is that, like, for people that are quick to say that Islam is the issue, Islam is probably one of the only religions that's the most unchanged. There's one Quran. It's the same Quran that was passed to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in like the early, like, I don't know, 1100s, 800s or something. Yeah. Like the Bible's been interpreted, reinterpreted many times. So Islam, that has stayed constant, or one of the most constant religions.
Yeah.
That has stayed the same. So surely people should be able to see that there's some other interacting elements that combine with it to create an issue.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you'd have something like terrorism existing all the time. It hasn't. It's come out in certain,
Yes.
time periods under certain social conditions.
Yes.
So, and I mean also Islam or Muslim isn't the only sort of group of people or society or whatever that has practiced extremism or carried out sort of suicide killings.
Yes.
There's the Tamil Tigers in Sri Lanka. They don't even believe in a god. They don't even believe in an afterlife. But they were in preservation of their like group of people, like would sacrifice themselves.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, if you look at something like, I mean, has anyone done any comparison between like the Lone Ranger that is willing to go and shit up a school in America and like
I was gonna say
like,
America.
I mean, like
I was gonna say America.
that's not terrorism apparently. I don't know.
It's definitely terrorism. Like, I don't know. The gun culture for me in America is a bit.
It's this thing of like us versus them. You know, if
Yeah.
you're not American, if you're Mexican, there's something wrong with you. You shouldn't be allowed here because you are.
But they've done it
culture and
to
way of living.
They've done it to mosques. They've done it to what's the synagogues,
yeah.
churches, schools. But yeah, man. Thank you so much for
I mean,
all
these are quite complex issues, and it's important for us as the youth to understand it and talk about it. And sure, it's quite a loaded thing, but like we should be, engaging in these discussions.
Yes.
You know,
to find
we
consensus.
should be bringing it up. We should there needs to be a more pragmatic engagement about these issues. Where people can understand. Like actually. Just because you're Muslim doesn't mean that you're a terrorist. Like,
I can't believe people actually believe that.
I mean, and the thing is, like, people might not go out there and say it, but the majority of right-wing ideologists in Israel, that's actually what they believe, and it's scary because it's based on fear, and they actually believe this because they have this fear that if you are a Muslim, you could kill me because I'm a Jewish person. And so ingrained this fear is within that society, and it's based on like after the Holocaust. So it's a complicated thing, and it's problematic because the only thing that we are seeing is the extremists on the one side, the far right Netanyahu's and whatever else in Israel, and you have Hamas and the far right in the occupied, or let's call it Palestine. It deserves to be called Palestine. Like. That's what we're seeing. We're not seeing the conservatives. We're not seeing how the conservatives can engage with each other. We're not seeing any of that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we need to start this conversation. We need to be having more conversations about these things, and the youth need to be a part of it.
Yeah, we definitely need an episode 2.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'd be happy to continue having these conversations, and it's an ongoing development. I mean, we could see the thing that's happening in Mozambique as like, okay, cool, it's almost done, but it's ongoing. The situation is getting worse and worse and worse. It makes us more like we need to start asking the question, could this become an issue in South Africa? How could this become an issue in South Africa, or even sub-Saharan Africa? I mean, it's one thing, okay, it might not ever come into South Africa, but Tanzania, DRC, Botswana.
Isn't it happening in Kenya already? Yeah.
I mean, the person, funnily enough, the person that radicalized the youth in Cabo Delgado was a Kenyan cleric, Abud Rogo. And a lot of his followers came to Cabo Delgado after he died. So, I mean, Kenyan, the Kenyan, like, sort of Islamic social-political environment has played an important role in helping to catalyze the insurgency in Mozambique. So we need to enter the SADC has started engagements. I'm not sure what the current state is, but a few years ago, not much.
Yeah, I don't think our military is actually... We're definitely not like America.
South Africa too scared to enter because Sassel actually...
But didn't someone die there?
I don't know, but I think Sassel has they are part of the investment scheme, or they are part of the companies that are like gave quite a lot of foreign investment into the LNG industry, the mineral and gas industry.
Yes.
And, you know, Al-Shabaab, which is what the sect call themselves in Mozambique, said, South Africans, you want to get involved? We'll come for you next. They stopped. They stopped. There's only private military contractors from South Africa. And South Africa has sold some helicopters to the Mozambican military. But beyond that, they're too scared. So if we're too scared, why are we not seeing this as a problem?
Yeah. I don't know, man. I think I was gonna be like an optimist. It's gonna work itself out. but I don't know. I don't know. This, you see, it's so complex. Like, I'm obviously of the belief that you need a wide range of interest groups to buy into one idea and push forward on that idea especially in these like war-torn countries.
I mean, like, what do we want? Do we want the government to show us the solution when they more often than not, like, at the forefront of creating these situations? Like, how do we deal with this?
Yeah. No, you can't. Well, yeah. I mean, yeah.
But I mean, let's see how the situation develops. Let's see what issues come up. And hopefully we'll have more directed conversations about what South Africa can do or what problem this poses to South Africa and how can we start to help, you know,
the situation.
like strategize like ways of contributing to alleviating the issue. Because, I mean, all you're doing is addressing social grievances. You're addressing...
Does South Africa, would you want South Africa to intervene?
I mean, it's irresponsible. I mean, if a state is, you know, being affected by violence, the responsibility of the international community to help that state. And it doesn't matter if, you know, America only wants to intervene where they can benefit them.
Yes.
But, like...
But it's not just America. Do you agree? It's like a whole host of countries.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like, I mean, what? The UN can only intervene if the US doesn't
veto.
No, like, even if they abstain.
Yeah.
You can't, because the US is the only security member that has LIFT, LYFT. They're the only security member that is allowed to transport troops of the UN from one place to another place. So not only do they need to abstain, they actually need to say yes in order for a situation to be intervened with. And that's where it gets complicated, because the US, more often than not, like, won't intervene until it's too late.
Yeah.
But I mean, changing the format and the structure of the UN to even include Africa as a permanent state, even though Africa's like 2 times bigger than Russia, even though the map showed differently.
I was speaking about that yesterday. I was like, when you measure from Senegal to Somalia, it's almost as big as from Portugal to the end of Russia. Yeah. How does that work? How?
Because white men wrote the rules. They drew the pictures for us. And we believe their fairy tales. So.
Okay, man, it's been a very good conversation, man. I've really enjoyed what we've spoken about. I know when you say white men, my DA tingling. My DA postman.
Don't ever speak to me as like in politics, because I will go to people.
But yeah, man, I want to thank you so much for coming on.
It's a pleasure.
And giving your views on everything. And I think there's going to be a lot of people that are going to appreciate your views. And I think that we need to talk about the issues, especially in the African, you know, Boko Haram and Cabo Delgado issues. Because, you dropped a lot of gems. And I feel like...
So if anyone is listening to this, if you do have questions, send them your way. I'm happy to answer those questions.
Yeah, and we can definitely have a part 2, man. But yeah, thanks, Mu'amr.
Cool.
I appreciate you, bro.
It's a pleasure having this conversation with you guys.